The message had been sent 100 times. The desperate calls for help echoed across the stars. Earth was dying. Its oceans were poisoned, its lands burned, and its air turned toxic. Humanity had reached out to the Galactic Council, begging for aid. The response came after months of silence, the cold, emotionless transmission from the Council's high command. Humanity does not qualify for assistance. You are not recognized as a contributing species. The Council will not interfere in natural extinction. The message ended. No explanation. No sympathy. Just a final rejection. The leaders of Earth sat in stunned silence. Billions of lives hung in the balance, and the galaxy had turned its back on them. Scientists had hoped the great empires of the stars would welcome them. They had hoped for technology, medicine, or even just a new world to call home. Instead, they were left to die. Anger spread like wildfire. The people of Earth had watched as alien ships traveled across their skies for decades. They had seen the wealth and power of the galaxy, yet now, when they needed help the most, they were treated like insects. Riots broke out. Cities fell into chaos. The weak gave up. The strong refused to accept the end. A new plan was formed, one that no one had dared to speak of before. If the galaxy would not help them, then they would leave it behind. Humanity would disappear into the darkness, away from prying eyes. They would become something else. A secret project was launched. The last remaining ships were gathered. Scientists, engineers, and soldiers worked night and day, creating something new. The world was breaking, but the human spirit refused to shatter. For years, the Council watched as Earth crumbled. They saw its people suffer. They believed humanity was finished. They did not know that deep beneath the surface, in hidden bunkers, a final fleet was being prepared. They did not know that the last survivors were not waiting for death. They were preparing for something far greater. The day finally came. The skies above Earth burned as the last ships left the dying planet, a fleet of exiles carrying the last hope of their kind. The Council ignored the event. To them, humanity was a failed species, doomed to vanish. The ships disappeared into the void, heading toward an unknown destination. They traveled beyond the borders of known space, into the cold, uncharted darkness. No one knew what lay ahead. But one thing was certain: this was not the end. This was the beginning of something new, something terrifying. The ships drifted silently through the darkness of space, far beyond the reach of the Galactic Council. No records marked their passage. No beacons lit their path. The last remnants of humanity had vanished without a trace, swallowed by the void. For years, they traveled through the unknown, searching for a place to rebuild. The journey was brutal. Resources were scarce. Many perished along the way. But those who survived became stronger. They learned to adapt. They learned to fight. Then, in the depths of an uncharted nebula, they found it. A dead world, hidden inside a swirling storm of cosmic dust. No light from distant stars could reach it. No signals could escape. It was a graveyard of blackened rock and frozen ruins, the remains of some long-forgotten civilization. To the desperate survivors, it was perfect. They landed in silence, stepping onto the barren ground with a grim determination. There was no time for mourning, no time for fear. Humanity had been cast aside, abandoned by the galaxy. Now they would forge their own destiny. The first years were the hardest. The planet's air was thin, its surface hostile, but humanity had already survived worse. They dug deep into the crust, carving cities from the stone. Machines roared to life, fueled by scavenged technology. The weak were gone. Only the strongest remained. Scientists worked in secret labs, pushing the limits of human biology and artificial intelligence. Soldiers trained in the underground caverns, preparing for a future war that no one else could see coming. They did not just rebuild civilization. They improved it. The Galactic Council believed humanity was dead, but in the darkness, something new was being born. Something stronger, something ruthless. For decades, they stayed hidden, watching the galaxy from the shadows. They saw how the great empires ruled, how the Council dictated the fate of entire worlds. They remembered the betrayal. And they never forgave. The first test came when an alien scout ship strayed too close to the nebula. It was a small vessel, its crew unaware of the nightmare waiting for them. A silent signal was sent. Automated defenses activated. Within seconds, the ship was disabled, dragged into the darkness like prey caught in a spider's web. The crew never had a chance to scream. Inside the hidden empire, the first experiment had begun. The aliens were studied, their technology analyzed, their bodies dissected, their weaknesses recorded. Every detail was added to the growing database of knowledge. Humanity was no longer just surviving. They were evolving. The galaxy had forgotten them, but soon they would remember. The Galactic Council did not notice at first. The patrol ship had simply vanished, one of many lost in the uncharted edges of space. The official report stated that it was likely destroyed by a rogue asteroid or a gravitational anomaly. No search parties were sent. No further investigation was ordered. But someone was watching. Deep within the bureaucratic machinery of the Council, a few sharp-eyed strategists noticed a pattern. Over the years, other ships had disappeared near the same region, a dark nebula untouched by any known civilization. It was an empty place, a dead zone. Nothing should have been there. And yet something was. A second patrol was dispatched, this time with a larger crew and better weapons. They moved cautiously, their scanners searching the void for any trace of the missing ships. The nebula loomed ahead, a swirling storm of dust and shadows. At first, all systems read normal. No unusual energy readings, no distress signals, just silence. Then something changed. The ship's lights flickered. The engines stuttered. A strange pulse rippled through the hull, like a whisper in the dark. The captain ordered a full retreat. It was too late. The ship's sensors screamed warnings of an incoming force, but there was nothing on the monitors. No ships, no weapons, just emptiness. Then, the void itself seemed to shift. Something massive moved within the nebula. Something cold, something unseen. A shape formed in the darkness, but the crew's minds refused to comprehend it. A single transmission was sent to the Council before the ship vanished. We are not alone. For the first time in centuries, fear spread through the great empires. The Council convened an emergency meeting. The missing ships could no longer be ignored. Something was lurking in the dark, something powerful enough to erase entire crews without a trace. Speculation ran wild. Some believed it was an ancient force, awakening after eons of slumber. Others feared it was a new alien species, more advanced than any known race. No one considered the impossible. No one believed that humanity had survived. But in the hidden empire, the time for secrecy was ending. The Watchers had seen enough. The test was complete. The galaxy had failed them once. Now, it would learn to fear them. The Galactic Council scrambled for answers. 2 ships had vanished near the dark nebula, and the whispers of something lurking in the void had begun to spread. Rumors traveled faster than light. Talk of ghosts in the darkness, of ships disappearing without a trace. The Council dismissed them as nonsense. They had ruled the stars for centuries. There was no force beyond their control. But fear had taken root. A fleet was assembled, larger, stronger, prepared for anything. The finest warships from the Council's strongest member races were deployed. Their mission was simple: investigate the nebula, locate the missing ships, and eliminate any threat. The fleet moved forward, cutting through the darkness like a blade of light. Their scanners searched for energy signatures, life signs, anything that could explain the disappearances. They found nothing. For hours, they patrolled the region. The nebula swirled around them, thick with dust and shadows. Their instruments detected strange distortions, faint echoes of something just beyond their reach. Then, the first ship went dark. No explosion, no distress call. One moment, it was there. The next, it was gone. Panic rippled through the fleet. The admiral barked orders, demanding a full sweep. The ships tightened formation, their weapons armed. They fired into the void, hoping to reveal whatever was hunting them. And then the lights went out. Not just on the ships, not just in the fleet. The stars themselves vanished. A wave of darkness spread through the nebula, swallowing everything. The fleet was blind. Their systems failed. Weapons refused to fire. Communications were silent. Then came the voices. Not words, not language, just whispers, cold and mechanical, slipping through the failing radios, seeping into the minds of the crews. A single message was broadcast across every ship. We remember. Panic turned to terror. The Council's finest warriors, the greatest naval commanders, all reduced to fear-stricken shadows of themselves. And then, the nightmare revealed itself. From the abyss, black ships emerged, silent, monstrous, built for one purpose. They did not look like the fragile vessels of the old human fleet. These were different. Sleek, angular, armored in unknown alloys. Ships without insignias, without markings. They moved without sound. They struck without warning. The first Council ship was torn apart in seconds. A beam of cold energy lanced through its hull, slicing through shields as if they did not exist. Explosions bloomed in the void, but there was no fire, just emptiness, swallowing everything. The fleet tried to fight back. They fired blindly into the shadows, but their weapons barely scratched the approaching darkness. One by one, the Council's warships fell. The Admiral, breathing heavily, sent a final distress call. No response. As his ship's hull cracked open, exposing him to the silent void, he saw something worse than death. The attackers. The nightmare made real. Humans, but not as they once were. These were not the desperate, dying people the Council had abandoned. These were something else. Something stronger. Something terrifying. And as the last ship fell, a final transmission was sent to the Galactic Council. You should have helped us. The distress signals never reached the Galactic Council. The fleet had vanished without a trace, erased as if it had never existed. Silence filled the void where once the most powerful warships in the galaxy had stood. But the silence did not last long. Across the stars, whispers of something unnatural spread. The Council tried to contain the rumors, dismissing them as accidents, pirate ambushes, or sensor malfunctions. But deep down, the ruling empires knew something was wrong. Their fleets were disappearing, their patrols lost in the abyss. Then the first attack came. A heavily fortified trade route, protected by advanced security measures, was obliterated in a single night. Not by a known enemy, not by an invading fleet, but by something unseen. The surveillance systems recorded nothing but darkness. The ships simply stopped responding. When reinforcements arrived, they found only wreckage, shattered hulls, floating debris, and the eerie absence of escape pods. There were no survivors, no distress beacons, nothing. A pattern emerged. One by one, the Council's strongholds were attacked. Space stations disappeared. Communications relays went silent. Key supply routes collapsed. There were no demands, no negotiations, only destruction. The galaxy was under siege. The Council, now desperate, sent its largest fleets to hunt down the enemy. They spread across the stars, searching for any trace of the unknown force. Then, without warning, a message arrived. A single transmission, broadcast across every Council-controlled world. A voice cold, mechanical, and inhuman. We were forgotten. We were abandoned. Now, we have returned. The Council's leaders froze. No name was given, no identity revealed. But the meaning was clear. Humanity. The species they had left to die had survived. And they had not come back as beggars. They had come back as conquerors. The Council's war leaders convened in panic. The great empires had grown soft, believing themselves invincible. They had treated humanity as insignificant, a mistake not worth remembering. Now, the mistake had returned, forged in the abyss, reborn as something far deadlier. The first real battle began above the industrial world of Calyria. A council fleet of 1,000 ships stood ready, armed with the best technology the galaxy had to offer. They were prepared for war. Or so they thought. The humans did not arrive with a massive fleet. They did not march like an invading army. Instead, the void itself seemed to shift, bending and twisting, until black shapes emerged from the darkness. Their ships had no energy signatures, no heat trails, no signs of life. It was as if the night itself had come alive. The council fleet opened fire first. The lasers and plasma rounds tore through the darkness, but the enemy ships moved like phantoms, shifting through space faster than any known technology should allow. Then, the nightmare truly began. A wave of silent black projectiles shot forward. Not energy weapons, not missiles, but something far worse. As the council ships were struck, their systems shut down instantly. Their shields flickered, their engines died, and the crews began screaming as something took hold of their ships. A virus, a sentient, living machine intelligence that had infiltrated their systems before they even realized they had been hit. The council ships turned against each other, firing on their own allies as their pilots lost control. Some were taken over entirely, forced to watch helplessly as their own hands obeyed a different master. Within minutes, the battle was over. The council's proud fleet was reduced to drifting wreckage. And then, the final horror. The survivors were not executed. They were taken, dragged into the shadows. The message was clear. Humanity had returned, and they were not simply here for vengeance. They were here to take everything. Panic spread through the Galactic Council like wildfire. Entire fleets had vanished into the void. Their ships turned against them. Space stations went dark, their inhabitants taken without a trace. Trade routes collapsed. Communication networks failed, and the most powerful empires of the galaxy were now gripped by an enemy that could not see, could not predict, and worst of all, could not stop. Humanity had not just returned. They had evolved into something far beyond what the galaxy had ever known. The Council, once arrogant in its power, now stood on the brink of collapse. The greatest minds of the ruling species gathered in secrecy, desperate for answers. "Who are they?" one leader demanded. "We thought them dead," another cried. The oldest members of the Council, those who still remembered Earth, remained silent. They had ignored the humans' cries for help. They had left them to rot on a dying planet, assuming they would fade into history like so many forgotten species before them. But the humans had done something no one predicted. They had disappeared into the void and rebuilt themselves into monsters. The Council's war strategists searched for any sign of weakness. Every battle had ended the same way: complete annihilation. The human ships were undetectable, their weapons unknown, their technology beyond anything the galaxy had seen. Then came the worst realization. Humanity had not only mastered war, they had mastered fear. Reports flooded in from distant colonies. Entire worlds were surrendering without a fight, not because they had been conquered, but because they had been broken. The attacks were precise. A planet's defense systems would flicker off for a single moment, just long enough for the inhabitants to understand that they were no longer in control. Then the whispers would begin. Voices in the darkness, creeping into every device, every system, even into the minds of the people themselves. Entire populations fell into paranoia, unable to trust their own eyes, their own thoughts. Some turned on each other. Others simply gave up. And when the first war-torn world sent an official message of surrender, there was no response. Because humanity did not want their surrender. They wanted the galaxy to kneel. The Council's final hope rested on a last-ditch effort, a desperate attempt to locate the humans' hidden empire and strike at its heart. If they could destroy their home, perhaps they could still turn the tide. A fleet of the most advanced stealth ships was sent deep into the nebula where the first disappearances had begun. It was a suicide mission, but there was no other choice. For days, the fleet moved in silence, scanning for any trace of the hidden empire. Their sensors picked up ancient ruins, remnants of lost civilizations that had once called the nebula home. And then, at the very edge of the void, they found it. A world shrouded in darkness, hidden within layers of defensive barriers more advanced than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Black monoliths rose from the surface, stretching into the sky like towers of the dead. There was no sunlight here, only an endless night, illuminated by the eerie glow of the structures below. It was not just a planet. It was a fortress. The fleet sent their findings back to the Council, hoping they had finally uncovered the humans' greatest secret. But their transmission never arrived, because they were already surrounded. From the blackness of space, the hidden empire's fleet emerged, silent as death. Hundreds of warships materialized from the void, each one larger and more terrifying than anything in the Council's arsenal. The fleet commander barely had time to react before the first shot was fired. Not a weapon, not an explosion. A signal. The ship's systems collapsed instantly, their weapons deactivating, their engines shutting down. The crew members screamed as their minds were invaded by something unseen, something ancient and cold. And then, for the first time, the humans spoke, not through stolen transmissions, not through haunting whispers, but in a voice that shattered the minds of those who heard it. We are the forgotten. We are the forsaken. And now, we have become the end. The Council's fleet never returned. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for what came next. Because for the first time in history, the rulers of the stars knew what it was like to be hunted. The galaxy was silent. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of something vast, something inevitable, creeping through the void like an unseen predator. The Galactic Council's greatest fleets had been annihilated. Their strongest planets had surrendered without a fight. Their rulers, once gods in their own eyes, now cowered in the shadows, whispering of an enemy they could not understand. Humanity had become something else, something terrifying, something unstoppable. And now, they had arrived. The Council's homeworld, the heart of the Galactic Empire, had stood untouched for millennia. It was the center of civilization, surrounded by layers of planetary defenses, automated warships, and battle stations the size of moons. No enemy had ever breached its security. No invader had ever come close. Until now. It began with a single blackout. The outermost satellites flickered off, their signals lost in the void. Then the long-range scanners failed. The orbital defenses, once the pride of the Council, went silent. Panic spread through the planet like wildfire. High-ranking officials barked orders, demanding answers, but their voices were drowned in static. Then the sky darkened. A shadow fell over the planet, not from a fleet, not from weapons, but from something greater. The void itself had come alive. And from that void, they emerged. Massive ships, their black hulls absorbing all light, descended without warning. They did not fire. They did not communicate. They simply watched, hanging over the planet like specters of the past, their presence more terrifying than any weapon. Then the screaming began. Not from explosions, not from war, but from something worse. The systems that controlled the planet's infrastructure turned against them. The great towers that housed the Council's elite locked their doors, trapping their inhabitants inside. The artificial intelligences that controlled the cities whispered strange words through every device, twisting their voices into echoes of forgotten pain. And then the people saw them. Not the ships, not the weapons, the humans. They walked through the streets without fear, without hesitation. Not as conquerors, not as invaders, but as something more. They were no longer the desperate refugees the galaxy had abandoned. They were shadows. They were ghosts. They were nightmares made real. The people of the Council world fell to their knees, not in worship, not in surrender, but in terror. And then the final message came. A single voice, broadcast across every device, every screen, every mind. You left us in the dark. Now, we are the dark. The Council's leaders, once untouchable, now faced their reckoning. Some tried to flee, but there was nowhere left to run. Some begged for mercy, but there was none left to give. And as the black ships loomed overhead, as the whispers of forgotten screams filled the air, the galaxy understood the truth. Humanity had returned, not for vengeance, not for conquest, but to remind the stars of the greatest mistake they had ever made. And as the Council's world fell into eternal night, the last words it ever heard echoed through the void. You should have saved us.